to look the way they wanted. In other words, they would soften edges. They would do dodging and burning. So again, they'd be softening edges. They'd be playing other edges up, making certain edges darker, making other edges softer. Exactly what I'm doing right now, they would be doing by hand, and did do by hand. And most of some of the better photographers, and some of the best photographers especially, a lot of them had drawing training, and some of them were really good drawing. They were really good at drawing. They were really good artists. They weren't just, I'm taking photographs because I can't draw. No, they were taking photographs because that was how they liked to express themselves, but they approached it and would manipulate it because, as Ansel Adams said, I never took one picture that was perfect right from just one shot. I guess he said no, there was one, the only one that ever turned out where he shot it, developed it, and didn't play with it, and there was one photograph, and that was out of thousands of photographs that he had done throughout his life. There was only one that had turned out that way, and everything else had to be heavily manipulated. And that was after he waited for the perfect moment. He would go into the mountains, with a donkey, and he would stay out there for weeks and weeks at a time looking for the best shot, because he would have this large camera. I don't know if they're 11 by 14 or 12/16. I don't have that because I don't do a lot with the with film. I don't know what the biggest is, but he'd have these big cameras that would take pictures on glass. They wouldn't take it on regular film, for those of you who even know what regular film looks like, but they were glass plates, and you'd have like maybe half a dozen. And so you really had to be sure that what you were taking picture of was something you really wanted to capture, because if it wasn't, then you got to, haul out this really mediocre shot on this piece of glass. So a lot of this was looking. A lot of it was just looking and waiting for the exact moment, for the exact scene. Sometimes they'd come upon a scene in the morning and go, oh, this will be spectacular, I bet, towards the evening, and would wait all day long and camp out there and watch the light change. And as evening started to come in, maybe a storm would come in, or maybe, the clouds weren't lining up quite right, or the light had gone, all that sort of stuff. So you'd waited all day long and it didn't happen. And so, he would move on, and he would just keep doing that all until he had the perfect, and he's like, oh yeah, okay, not only will this look right, but it is looking right, the light's coming out just right, the way that the patterning of the trees through the valley is just what I want, the light is sculpting the valley the way I want. And he would pull out his camera and wait to just the right scene, and then snap the shot. Because again, you had one piece of glass. You had to get it right the first time. There was no, oh, I think I'll do that again. And he certainly didn't have a smartphone where you take 300 photographs in 10 minutes and then hope you get a good one out of that. That's just like the shotgun effect, where you just do it and you just kind of, cross your fingers. That's not the way that he would work, and that's not the way that most artists work. They're not just haphazardly hoping and hoping to the little whatever, the hoping to whatever muses out there might get a good photograph. That's not the way it happens. That's not the way artists work. Thank goodness, because otherwise there'd be a lot more mediocre art out there. Artists are meticulous. They plan out what they're doing. And sometimes I have people like, oh, I don't know, I saw this stuff, and I was over in this museum, and you can't tell me that this, that, and the other. And, people like, Cezanne, oh yeah, they planned. There's stories about people watching Cezanne and paint. I remember one, I think it's either Cezanne or, anyways, it was one of the impressionists. And this person had photoed this journalist. Just trying to say photographer, because I'm still thinking photographer. But this journalist was sitting in this apartment, and he noticed that there was this painter, and he realized that this painter. This was back when painters were like, back in the day, painters were as big as movie moguls now, or directors or things. So he's like, "Ooh, that's so and so," and he was really excited to watch this guy paint, because of the whole. The mystique of art and all this sort of stuff. And he would sit there, and he talked about how he would make a stroke, or maybe two strokes, and then he would go back across the room, and stare at the painting for as long as 20 minutes to a half hour. And then he would step forward and make another couple strokes. And then he would stand back and he'd wait for 20 minutes to a half hour. He was going through his mind how that stroke affects all the other strokes. And when you have 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 strokes on a canvas, that takes some time. It's planning. The guy was so bored after a while, he went to go do something. He was tired of watching, because the mystique of what they're doing versus the actual work of it are two very, very, very different things. And so we want to make sure that, again, that we are being meticulous, that we are planning, that we are looking, that we are judging how this stroke is against that stroke there, and so forth and so on. And if we're not, we may not be. You probably shouldn't be surprised if you don't get a great drawing or a great painting, because it's about looking, it's about judging, it's about seeing what you just did and how does that stack up against all this other stuff. So again, I've just been playing a little bit with all these different rocks. Like this rock here, again, I left a little bit of an edge, but that edge is too light. So using this 2H pencil, I'm going to push that edge or darken it just a scotch so it begins to kind of bleed. Now, I don't want to get rid of it entirely. By bleed, meaning it disappears, it softens. It's going to soften into the dark values of this rock over here. Okay. So we're just going to continue, working on this thing. Continue making it happen, so to speak. This rock right here, not all that big a deal to me. I'm just going to go ahead and put this rock. I'm going to go ahead and simplify, just put enough information. That was the word I meant, was information. And I'm going to just put enough information so I can go, yeah, it looks rock-like. Because this is on the edge. It's not that important to me. We want the eye up here. This down here doesn't matter. So I'm going to go ahead and, using a regular shape. Now it's actually covered by a second rock. So I'm actually going to be using some, I have to kind of design this because I'm trying to see past the rock that's on top of it. So I'm going to use some of this rock and some of that rock and the little bit of rock I see of that to define that rock. Sometimes that can seem sort of strange when you say that. People are like, wait, what? How does that work? Well, I can't, you can just, if you're really super good, maybe you have a good enough memory that you can make something up, design something without any sort of help whatsoever. I'm not that way, and most artists I know aren't that way. They need some help. They need, and so we're looking to other objects around this object to help us out. There's other rocks. Well, yeah, let's use those rocks to help me as I'm drawing this rock, and then by doing that, my rock will look like a rock. So that's what we want to do. And that's what will make this. Again, I don't need to detail this rock entirely, but there's going to be these little subplanes and main planes and stuff like that happening on this rock. It's really quite an interesting surface. This rock here has some really interesting things happening on it. Again, I'm using very straight lines to help define planes, make it seem more like it's a rock. Why wouldn't I? And I want it to look like a rock, so why wouldn't I use something that's going to make it look more rock-like? Okay. All right. Now I'm going to use my HB pencil. It'll be a little darker than the pencil I was just using, but not too dark. That's good. So I've used the 2B a lot, but the 2B is darker than the HB, and right now I don't want something too dark. I just want it dark enough. Try to make this a little ridge, like a little shelf. So there's a little shelf here, and then this plane here and this plane here is flat. So again, we can try to make it look more rock-like as far as that goes. All right. Okay, so I think this is starting to have a feeling of rockiness. It's embracing its inner rock, and that's what we want, right? And I think we're going to come in here with the 2H again. The 2H can be a wonderful thing for these subtle planes, halftones. These are actually, yeah, these are be light halftones. Like so, happening here on that rock. Okay, I've lost a little bit of the light, so we're going to come back in here just a bit and pull back out some of the lights out of that rock. Now, again, there's all this stuff going on here. This right back here has all kinds of little, there's like a flat shelf rock that this is on. There's little pebbles that are on here overlapping little shapes as this goes back in here. And we don't want to get too dark, but we do want we want the fact that there is some of this happening. These little shapes are what? Right now, all mine are the same size. That's not a good thing. That's repetition, and we want a little bit more randomness, like we were talking about in the part 1 of drawing rocks. Mother Nature has such a wonderful randomness to her that there's all the patterns are always just a little bit different. No two are ever the same. It's like the uniqueness of a snowflake. Well, when we're making shapes, we got to make sure that we're getting the same sort of thing happening, or it won't look like Mother Nature had anything to do with it. It'll just look like it's just too much the same. Not enough of that randomness. And so as we're making our shapes, we want to break our shapes up, make the shapes a little more random. I'm going to go ahead and also put a little bit of value here, knock this down, pull this out, pull this part of the stone up and out, and now we're going to come over here and we're going to make, using again these straight little planes here, we're going to try to make this look rock-like. As far as that goes. All right. Now, as I'm turning this into more of a rock, this gets a little bit darker through there. Now, this is really this lighter shelf. But again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to reverse. I'm going to darken a little bit more than it actually is for right now. Because if it's too light, again, it'll pull your eye right to that corner. And we don't want our eye to just kind of sit there in that corner. So we're going to go ahead and we're just going to allow it to be a little darker so that our eye will kind of look past it and go back over into here. And so the way we're going to do this is I'm going to make this a little darker, And then this part over here, leave this a little lighter. And by doing that, this will then pull the eye this way and away off the corner. So again, we're changing it up. Not by a lot, but we are changing it up so that we're redesigning so that what happens is that we'll have more depth at the end than if I don't do this. It's all about, again, trying to make this have enough information so that it will work and give us the illusion we want, but also we're using this for composition. Don't want my eye here, I want my eye there. I'm going to go ahead and probably put a little bit of a flat tone across here. Just a little bit. Got to be really careful, because if you go too dark on this, again, all this will go flat. It'll all suffer, so we've got to be very careful with this. Just bring this around. Just a little bit more. All right. So bring this around here. Bring this around. Again, I don't want my eye to get stuck into this little area through here, so again, we're going to go ahead okay. I think that's just dark enough, and then we're going to come over here. There's a couple places where we need to bring this, again, this ridge around, which is a little bit more, a little darker halftones. Not too much. Again, we're not here to try to put all this detail right here, because that would give us a different problem if we, if we went ahead and made this too detailed. So I'm going to go ahead and I think we're going to go ahead and bring some of this in, some of this value around here. Like so. This is going to soften this. So again, we're not going to detail each and every little bit on here. There are a couple places where I'm like, man, I wish this had more of a plane change. As this goes over here, I wish it had a little bit more of a plane change. So there's going to be some places where we're going to go ahead and try to add just a little extra. Like I wish this had a little bit more information than this right here. Had a little more information. So again, and I'm going to come over here right where the shadow and the light meet. And if I darken that and then let it get lighter, that looks like reflected light down here. And so we can use this to start to, again, to sculpt a little bit of our forms and make them feel like there's just a little bit of, again, they might be getting a little lighter down here because of reflected light and stuff. I'm going to lighten that up a little bit, and I think that's too much, so I'm going to push it back down. But that's the idea. I can lighten it up, I can push it down, I can bring it back. I can just keep playing the game until it's doing, what I want it to do. It's looking how I want it to look. Okay, so right here, this again, one edge goes lighter, one edge goes darker. This is the ground, this is the rock. To make this edge look lighter, I darken the ground just a little bit right next to it, and then I'm going to lighten it up again. So all right. Something about like that. Now again, a lot of this is really going to be about, again, these rocks in here. So again, in other words, we're going to put some more information on this rock. There's like a half tone here, and then there's the deep shadow. So I'm going to come and leave this over here, and then we're going to come into that deep shadow. Now I've got an H, so I'm going to use an HB. It won't be near as dark as the 3B, but there's also reflected light on the bottom, just barely. And again, the image that you can click to on the link, you'll be able to see a little bit better some of that reflected light. So we don't want to get rid of that. That's going to give us a little more information. That's going to make our rock look like it has more detail, because we have more information of what the light is doing in the shadows, as well as what's happening in the lights too. And again, that will just help our drawing. And try to transition this line. It's too crisp. We need to make it more, there we go, gradation. Just a little bit of a gradation. Now I can also, there's a very deep shadow under this rock. So I could come all under here and just, again, darken a little bit of that deep shadow. That will help the reflected light look brighter. There's, again, a bit of a deep shadow under the rock here. And again, will help what's going on. There's this rock back here that's darker, again, because of its, it's casting a shadow onto that rock. Getting just a little bit more information. Again, we're going to have, this gets a little bit darker, and then there's the sort of the just before it drops into shadow, or in other words, a dark halftone or a dark middle value. So there's the dark, and then it gets a little bit lighter, and then it drops down into much deeper value, and then it has reflected light on the bottom. So we're trying to get back to where we're with these main rocks, where we're going to try to get some more information on here of what's happening with the form. And we got to be careful though, because if we have more detail in the shadows than we do in the light, that's a problem, because there's lower light in the shadows, which means they're going to merge a little more. There's not quite you're not going to have the crisp edges. There's going to be some that's going on, but it's going to be very soft. So we have to be careful that we don't go, too far, or that's a problem. And that goes for anything. Anytime we're like, if you get, put too much into it, or too much detail in the wrong place, that's a problem. Things like that. So let's come up here and back into the lights a little bit and see if we can, again, bring in just a little bit more detail of the surface. There's like a little crack or fissure here in this rock right through there. There's another little sort of sub plane catching a little bit of sort of it's almost a shadow, because it's a little bit of a pucker, a little bit of a little plane change, a little pucker. It puckers up, it bumps upward, whatever we want to say. Just got to make sure I pronounce that really clearly if I'm on, on the tape, because we don't want there to be any misunderstandings. So again, I'm just trying to put a little more information in here. As we set about, and we also have the fact this over here is a different stone, so there's something where I was like, that doesn't look right, and I looked at the picture, I'm like, well, that's partly because that's a different stone. So we're going to go ahead and make that a little different. Okay, I don't like that rock, so we're going to do a little bit of redesign in this area. We're going to go ahead, because right now it coincides with the top of that. That obscures that this could be a different rock, because it starts to align with things, and that because it's aligning, it makes it seem like it's something that it's not. It also is kind of echoing this shape, so I'm going to round off that shape a little bit. I think it'll just be a little more clear to the eye that, to me in my drawing, that this is something different than what's happening here, and that's what I want. That it's not the same. That it is in fact different. Okay. All right. So again, we're just trying to get some more. Got to be careful, because again, I'm starting to get maybe a little too much for this one little area, so I'm going to lighten this out, blow this out a little bit. Again, a little rock back here that helps define the top of that plane. Okay. All right. So again, let's move on to what's going on over here. Now again, we've got this whole thing as light, but we actually have two things. We have rocks and we have the earth. Now the earth here is actually darker than the stone. So we have some rocks and then we have some earth. So what I'm going to do is, for the earth, I'm going to darken the earth to make sure that overall, in general, it's darker than the rocks. I think I was using a 2H, so I'm going to come back in for it with an HB, because it was just too light. I want to have, again, that this is and I'm making these irregular patches so that it actually will give me sort of what feels like overlapping planes as I'm making that, what's going to supposedly this earth. But again, I'm trying to make it these irregular patterns of light to dark, so that again it does look more like patchy ground and so forth and so on. There's also, again, all this is rock, this is dirt, and again we want to make sure that we know which is which to begin with. So I'm going to go ahead and darken. Maybe I need to darken a little bit more as I'm doing this. But we're going to try to make sure, again, that the earth is dark enough that it looks like it's a different material than the rocks. If we don't do that, it won't quite look right. And it'll bleed into the rock, and we won't be able to figure out why what's what, and that's just not what we want. So we're going to go ahead, and again, this is looking too much like a starfish. I know what's going on with that rock, but we're going to go ahead, I think, and I don't know that I like it that way either. We're going to bring this around a little bit. And it does that in the yeah, there's the rock. Okay. That looks so much better. Okay, so we're going to go ahead. There's a little bit too much of a point, so we're going to take some of that point off. Because, rocks in nature, if you got a point like that, usually it'll get worn out. Another rock falls on it, something steps on it, it'll snap that thin little piece right back off of there. So again, we're going to go ahead and we're darkening this. It's also, closing it out. In other words, we're going to make it so that, again, our eye comes over here to where stuff is lighter. So again, it's going to be a compositional thing that will really help as we're drawing. That'll be really nice. And this is all dirt. There's still light sides and dark sides. Like this is this rut. It's from erosion or what have you, where the water is going to come down and spill into the river. That's further over this direction. But and again, we've got all this right here is dirt. And it's really kind of nice that we have this area where there's not as bright of lights, because visually it makes that area become what's called a rest area, meaning that your eye will get there and it's not going to be jumping around because there's not as much activity. And that'll be nice, because we're going to want some areas where we don't have, everything. If too much going on, it can be distracting and even a little irritating. Remember an old movie I saw that was actually quite well animated. It was computer animated, but there was just so much going on that you couldn't enjoy it, even though they did such a great job of the technical job of the animation. The way that everything was just piled on, and there was all multiple things happening and moving in and out like you're on some sort of a ride or something as you're moving through, and it kept doing that over and over with multiple things happening and multiple action scenes and just all kinds of stuff going on. And it was just like, whoa, that's just too much. It almost became, you're almost laughing. It wasn't, they were trying to be serious, but you were kind of laughing because of how not serious it looked, because of all that was going on. It was like it's like if you ever watch a movie where you have a fight scene that goes on too long, it starts to look more like they're dancing, and you can end up laughing instead of actually enjoying the scene, because it almost seems, it's like a farce, or it's like it's whimsical. It's like that's not the way it happens. Most fights are 2 or 3 blows and that's it. It goes to the ground or it's over. And when you have something with some fight scene going on for 5 minutes where it keeps changing this and changing that and changing it up and changing again and changing this and changing that, it's just distracting. And I don't know how I got started on this. Oh yes, the rest area. We're doing the same thing. If we had too much of this rock everywhere, this little stuff, it becomes very very distracting. So we have these large areas that make these areas look better because they're rest areas, and then this area over here is even more of a rest area, and that's just compositional stuff. That's how people will, they don't know why, but they'll enjoy your painting more, or your drawing, or if you're directing a movie, you have to think about that kind of stuff, in terms of the action and the sequencing and how it all fits together. Because if you don't, it's not going to be as enjoyable a film. It just people can get into the idea of Gestalt and the different theories and the way that we react to visual stimulus and all these different things. And there's a lot to that. That's good stuff. That's not nonsense. So again, we got that going on in this. I wanted areas that were active. I wanted areas that were restful. This kind of helps bring your eye around this more restful area with this more textured stuff going on. It's very nice. Could even come in here again, start to bring just some things that start to look like, again, where we can go ahead and start tapping this to get. Sometimes people will, they used to do things with pens called pointillism, where you'd make, and you can actually make a drawing this way with a pencil and stuff like that. And it's just ways of creating texture. And you're going to want some areas where you're going to want a little bit of that texture, and we're going to save that for this area and this area. And usually you'll have a third area, and so I think we're going to do these three rocks are the main guys. And what's going on over here is not so much. So again, we're going to keep this a little more simple as we continue to draw on this. Okay, and I think I need to kick this into high gear, because I think we're going to end up with a video that's like 3.5 hours long, and that's probably not what I want as far as that goes. But we do want to have enough information that it looks like it's, again, if I was going to do a finished drawing, I could very easily put, again, 10 hours in on this thing, easy. I could put 15 to 20 on this, very, very, if I was going to do like a photorealistic rendering, yeah, get ready for 15, 20 hours. And everything's become smaller, every little thing, you start building it up and up, and then blotting it out, and then putting it back in, and pulling it back out, and making little marks that then become parts of, where you put a layer of value to kind of knock it back and pull it out. And it can, that's the way that you can create some really deep looking drawings and paintings too. You can do a lot of that sort of stuff to give yourself a really nice rich painting, rich with textures and different flourishes and different things. And some people will get really into it, where they'll, they might bring if I had a different paper, they could take water media, they might bring in a little bit of, splatter some water in there again to give you a certain texture, and different other things. You can do stippling, and then you could do just a myriad of techniques for those that are really, get into the techniques of drawing. There's a lot of them. Most artists don't use more than maybe a dozen or a handful, but there's all kinds of techniques to create different values and things like that. With, again, I could make value with little circles to start to create textures. I could even, this would be silly for this ground, but if I was doing grass, you could make little X's to make, and what happens is you'll start creating different sorts of textures, and it can be very, very interesting, very, very appealing way of working. And you can also, of course, that's the same thing we're doing with this, when we're using the weaving things with the lines. You can start to point stuff different directions by the way the line goes in your drawing and stuff like that. So this is, again, we're talking a little bit about texture and things like that. Again, I could start to use little, again, concentric circles. I could do stippling. I could do a combination of this stuff. I could even do, again, little X's or little squares, little triangles. Again, just whatever I can do sometimes to get a little different texture. If I'm doing rendering, then I'll do it. If it gets a little too much, well, we can knock it back. We can always come in here with with this brush and just settle it on in. Come back over with a 2H pencil to bring a little bit of luster back into that. I don't think I need this in the corner. We're going to go ahead and knock that back. There's a rock that comes across the corner. I don't think that's needed, and in fact, I think it's a little distracting. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. You know, so even while we're drawing, we're trying to compose, trying to make it better. We're trying to make it hopefully look so good that it, you know, someone can might see this and say, I can't live without it. And you go, great, is that cash or charge? And away they go with it. You know, and you want people to get that sort of a excitement about your work. You want them to, you know, to really like your drawings. And if we're really lucky, you not only just like them, but that sometimes they will touch people in ways that, you know, photographs just can't, and even music can't. That's when you're really saying something to somebody that they feel it deep down, and that's where it really gets fun. That's where it really gets, you know, for the artist, you know, that's where it really that's the fun part. That's why we do art, to inspire people, to make them feel something when they look at your drawing or painting, that they have an emotional response. Not just an intellectual response, but an emotional response. Can't tell you how, you know, these days, you know, some people go on and on about the intellectual side of their drawing or painting, and I just don't care. Because it has to say it in the drawing or painting. If someone has to explain it to you, then it's not that great of a drawing or painting. It should be very clear what the person's trying to say. Or at least hinted at, enough so that it captivates the imagination. If it doesn't captivate you, if it doesn't interest you, no one's going to look at that painting. No one's going to care. And that's the worst thing. Tell me you hate my painting rather than saying you don't care. I'd rather have someone like it or hate it, but I don't want anyone to ever be mediocre about one of my paintings or drawings when they look at it. I want them to have a definite, I like that or I hate that. Better that than, you know, just not caring. That means I really dropped the ball. If I can't get an emotional response to something, I didn't do my job as an artist. And the image didn't do its job either, you know, sort of thing. So, but here I am just going on and on and on. But these are the kinds of things that we think about as we draw. These are the kind of things we think about when we create. We want to have stuff that inspires. We want to have stuff that is pleasing to the eye, but also interesting to the mind. We want all that stuff. Why wouldn't we? And as an artist, why wouldn't you want to put that in your work? You know, why wouldn't you want to say something? There's all kind of people that will go throughout their entire lives without having said anything important. What makes us want to create is to say something. Hey, this was beautiful to me. Hey, this was something important to me. Hey, this was something that I thought was amazing, and I want to share it with you. That's what you want to do with your drawing. That's what you want to do with your painting. You know, is say something that means something. Hey, this is what I felt. This is what I thought. This is what I feel. This is what I think. This is what I know with my experience on this you know, rock of existence. Here's what I've discovered. I hope you enjoy it. And then you let that person, you know, hopefully experience some of what you have to say. And if it's something, you know, if it's powerful enough, they will. And if it's powerful enough, it will. Drawings can affect, and paintings can affect, and artwork can affect people in ways that other stuff just can't. There's things that I was exposed to as a child in terms of paintings and things that I still think about. They still resonate. When I first got into college, our instructor would talk about having a conversation with an artist through their work. And when I first heard that, I thought that was being a little bit over the top. But the more you studied the different artists, and the more you understood what they were saying, and the more that you looked, you could almost begin to hear the artist, you know, the really good ones like Rembrandt and others. You could hear their voice. You could hear the brush strokes. You could hear the the scraping of the pencil against the paper surface. It became something where, you know, they captivated you. They spoke to you. They whispered. They yelled. They shouted. Sometimes they stamped their feet, but they were trying to say, you know, something to you across the ages, across the centuries, across the millennia in some cases. You know, there's some interesting murals that I remember seeing from, I believe they were Etruscan. They might have been from Pompeii. I'm trying to remember if it was Etruscan or Pompeii. But it was interesting because, I mean, despite the fact these people were looking, you know, wearing togas or what have you, they still very much, you could see the fact that other than the wrappings and the distance of time, that they're really no different than us. You know, that they had their leisure time, they had the things they liked, they had the things they didn't like, they had everyday life, they had, you know, what they found to be beautiful. You know, some of the murals would have, you know, some of the different, you know, they were next to the sea, they would have fish and porpoises or something like that, and different types of flora or fauna from the area. Just, you know, the things that surrounded them, the things that were a part of their life. And when you see stuff like that, you begin to understand that again, we are connected, that there is a connection between us, and that there is, you know, that no matter what the time, the period, the place, that there is something that connects us all. And that's the fabulous thing about looking at something like that, when you can look at it and say, yeah, there is something that connects us all. We're just going to keep on working on this. We're going to come back after a little break and try to finish this out. All right, let's go ahead, and it's going to be a 4-hour video, it looks like. I don't know, I can only imagine. We've been going here for quite some time, but we're going to try to finish this out. So I'm just going to try to put some value into this particular, enough so again it looks rock-like. I'm not going to sit here, we're not here to, this doesn't matter as much. Now it's also in the foreground, so I'm not saying that it doesn't matter at all, just it doesn't matter as much as we are putting down our detail, so to speak. All right, so again, this stuff over here, again, just enough so it looks like we've got rocks. And again, I'm going to use whatever at my disposal. But I think, you know, I'm making textures, but I am looking at I'm taking my eyes out of focus. I'm looking out of the corner of my eye at these different rocks. So I'm looking for patterns that I can actually see in the rock. Again, I'm not trying to just make stuff up, but I'm trying to very quickly look from here to here to here to here, and to give myself, you know, sort of ideas for textures as I'm doing the drawing. All right, and why wouldn't I? Because that's going to give this thing some depth. It's going to give this thing some interest. It's going to give it enough information. Now again, over here I don't care as much, so again, just going to put enough information in here that it's going to look like rocks. And so that's what I'm going to do, just enough. And I keep looking again at the picture, back to my picture, to the picture, back to my picture, and again we want just enough information so this stuff looks rock-like. That's what we're looking for. I want that rock-like, no problem. Now there's a rock here, two rocks that come together, And so what we're going to do is we need to split it up, because right now it looks like the same rock with a line down it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring a little bit more value so this does not line up with that. And so now it looks like two overlapping rocks. So that's how, again, we can just change something very, very gently, very, very softly, and again have it look more like what it is we're drawing. So I think we're starting to get this just, about to where I can leave this alone, and we can come back over here into the into this rock, because this is what really is going to make this happen. This is still a little too light. It's got no value on it whatsoever. That is not. That's going to be too bright, because this is going to start to get darker. So as this gets darker, this will start to, that would just start to shine too brightly, as far as that goes. And so, okay. Now this starts to look like Tweedledee and Tweedledum, or little teeth or something. And this is the other thing. I might have to go, do I want, maybe I could take and merge two of these rocks into one, so it doesn't look quite so much like, and I could, smooth it out so it doesn't look as much like teeth. Got to work it a little bit, and then maybe this will slam into here, so again it doesn't look like it's a space between molars or something. These really start to look molar-like. So I'm going to go ahead and change that rock up a bit, like so. And then I'm going to bring over my 2H pencil. Again, I just have to do it enough so again it looks like it could be a rock. I don't have to do it, I don't have to detail it. This is just not that important. I think this would wrap the other direction though. So again, I'm not ignoring it, but I'm not, losing sleep over it either. There's my HB. Right there. That would then go into there, that goes into there. And again, so that's, I don't need to, again, sit there and worry about it too much, but I don't want to ignore it either. So now we can actually get into this rock. We have just enough information here in quite a few places that we can go, okay, yeah, this starts to look like a bunch of rocks. Again, I could come into here a little bit if I wanted to, and again, change this up a little bit, lift it up, also darken it out a little bit so it doesn't feel too much like it's, if it's too light at the bottom, again, it can be distracting to the eyes. So it's a compositional thing, so is everything else. But now we're going to deal with this rock, and so I think we're probably going to use I'm going to really use my line weight. Not just my line weight, but my direction of my line as far as this goes. Maybe I'll do it this way. So, or maybe I'll do a little hatching too. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with the lightest part, and then it changes direction slightly in a couple different ways. So, and maybe we're just going to bring this down in here, and this is going to go down into there, and this is going to go over here. So we're getting these subtle little plane changes on this rock. This is an HB pencil. So there's a point at which I'm going to ditch the HB, and so I'm just keeping an eye on it. Is all that means while I'm doing all this, is I'm really just keeping an eye to make sure it doesn't get too dark, because again, I don't want to blow all this out. Again, in the picture, this one a little bit darker, this is a little brighter. You'll see that in the picture if you download it. There'll be a little bit more contrast, a little more difference in the rock, which is a good thing. Just to break it up a little bit. Bring just a little bit of some of these fissures in here. Or in other words, these different little cavities and or planes. You know, like back here, there's a plane that's kind of kicking back and up and things like that. There's a little bit of one through here, a little more subtle. When we start to get these plates through here, so we get these areas of lighter versus darker. And again, they can't be too. That looks like a rectangle, so they've got to be a little irregular, so they'll look more organic. Is the term that people will use. You want them to look. Yeah, I mean, there's no other way to put it. You want them to look. Well, when I say organic, I think I said, well, wait a minute. Way back in the other one, we said, well, these aren't organic shapes because they're straighter, and there certainly is that something to that. But if they're too much like a triangle, or too much like a square, or too much like, they won't look natural either. So natural is the term I should have used, as opposed to instead of organic, because organic is flowers and things that are very round, and you know, people and animals and you know, sea life and all that good stuff. Those are organic shapes. They twist, they turn. These are much flatter, and so we call these inorganic shapes. But they still have to have, again, some of that randomness of nature, or they won't feel like rocks. They just won't look natural. They'll be like, wait a minute. That's why sometimes people will. I've seen crystals where they've had like crystals and or metals that are like a perfect cube and stuff like that, or a triangle or pyramid, and they look very unusual because these are not natural things. Things in nature have, you know, their corners will be shorn off. They'll have, you know, little, you know, flat spots and dips and gullies and furrows and all this sort of stuff. And you know, that's because of weather and time and you know, where they're sitting, and you know, in this case, the waters will cover these rocks, and they'll be beaten with other rocks against one another, and so again, it's going to chip away and make it look more like, yeah, that's a rock. That's a rock next to a river that's constantly getting flooded and constantly getting beat on by the elements and other rocks and all this stuff. And if I can start to capture some of that, I'll have something that looks like that rock. If I don't, then it will. There's a very good chance that my rock won't look rock-like at all. It will lose that illusion of the rock, and we don't want it to lose that illusion of rock. We want it to look like a rock. So, you know, anyway, so I'm going to use this H pencil. I'm hatching with it too, but since the H pencils they go down smoother, and I can, by hatching the lines, or in other words, by making the lines closer and closer together, it looks smoother and smoother and smoother. And again, you can also start to smooth areas and leave other areas, you know, with more of that hatching, and it starts to look like a screen, or in other words, texture. And so again, it can be very, you know, just a great way of creating the illusion of something with texture, and we want some of that. We certainly do while we draw this. And again, it can be, you know, we can very quickly end up with something that's starting to look very much like a rock. I'm going to go ahead and come in here again, fill in some of these holes between these lines, because that looks too rough. But once we start to fill them in, you know, enough, well, then it starts to look like, oh, I can see a shape emerge, and I'll make this shape, and then and usually they're triangles, parallelograms, but they're, you know, but a lot of times they're almost, you know, like a triangle next to a rectangle. And so we're going to look for these shapes. You can almost call them compound shapes of these, you know, very simple shapes that begin to merge and meet up and are married one to the other, and they start to have, again, a wonderful look of something like stone. Okay. And again, this is the fun part. This is where this is what you wait for, where you're like, okay, now I'm doing some of this. Because if everything else has fallen into place, this can come together very quickly. And it's starting to do that, where I'm like, yeah, okay, this is what I want. The shadows are going to go darker because we've blown out the light. So I know for those of you that are very astute, you'll be like, hey, wait a minute. What happened to those lights there? It looks like this is going flat. There is some of the area that's going to go flat, but I'm going to push the shadows enough that this will start to look like the lights again. So everything that I do has a plan, and I talk to people about the planning stages of drawing and painting. Luckily, drawings are like checkers. They're pretty simple. We're still planning ahead, but it's not like chess, where usually with chess you got so many different moving parts, and again, chess masters, they're planning 4, 5, 10 steps ahead, or whatever, and they got all these different steps going through their brain. Luckily for us, that drawing is not that complicated. It's a much simpler. It's like checkers compared to chess. Or for those that are like, well, chess is easy, but it's not like, I don't know, Mahjong, or some of those, again, more complex sorts of games. And I'm sure, I think that someone said there's one that's like Mahjong on steroids. It's supposed to be a very complex game, a very ancient game, because they had time to burn. They had to do something to stay interested. They had to do something to keep themselves, whatever, awake or whatever. They didn't have, the smartphones. They didn't have, television. They didn't have the theater and the opera and all that good stuff. So they had to find other ways to fill their time for their downtime. And so, again, there were certainly games that were invented that were, again, that probably put ours to shame. There's an old legend about, I believe it was the Romans, and they were going to conquer a certain civilization, and they were known for this knot that they had invented, and the knot was very complex. And they had told the would-be conquerors that if they could solve the rope, that they would hand over the city. And I believe the story goes that the Roman, the leader of the armies, took out his sword and cut the knot, and then they marched into the city and took it. Now, if that's not a true story, if that's just a legend, I apologize. I've heard it several times by certain people that I believe should know what they're talking about. But what's intriguing to me is, again, how the mind of man can come up with and craft things that are, again, very, very complex and can boggle the minds of others. And so I have no doubt that this, was a true civilization and a true story of sorts. Probably didn't go down quite so, almost sounds like a cinematic moment, but still, the idea is that, the guy's like, okay, all right, and he cuts it with his sword and says, all right, move on in, guys. But so we're going to go ahead, and now we're going to start dealing with the shadows. And again, the shadows, and this is the rock I really want to highlight. Whenever you're drawing, you always want to have, the main actors and the supporting cast. This guy right here is the main actor. He is not the supporting cast. And so we want to have, he's got to have the most contrast. He's got to have the most detail. He's got to have, just the biggest stage presence, all that sort of stuff. And so we're going to try to make sure that that's what happens with this guy, that he does have all those different things at his disposal. And so we're going to just try to, again, bring back some of the information into here. Now, so again, this one will have more information than any others of what's going on in the shadows. We want that sort of information or detail, as we might say. Now again, we're using mostly form shadows. We're not getting in here and trying to detail this with hyperrealism. If I was, I'd have to get to this point where I'm going to be in the next 20 minutes, and then you'd start to go ahead and get into smaller pieces and doing tapping and pulling things out with an eraser. You'd start to really kick it up to the next level of detail, but you can't lose the original form, light to dark relationships. If you do, then it's game over. You're going to destroy the drawing. So it's a balance once again. Now there's some splotches here on this. You got to be careful. You know, it looks, and that's because it's a bad print. I think I mentioned it at least once. If I hadn't, then yes, it's a bad print. And so you're going to want to look at the print that I provide, or the photograph I provide, and you're going to have just a much better a better print. But you also have to be careful too, because there's something about when it simplifies things. Like this is a bad print, which means the print has lost information. It's simplified stuff. As a beginning artist, sometimes we don't know what to eliminate, and so sometimes working from a bad, you know, I remember, you know, sometimes they'd be like, you know, as an illustrator, be like, here, go make a photocopy of that, you know, that photograph, which of course is was a really bad photograph, but what it did is simplified everything. And they'd be like, there you go. If you can get what's in that copy and get that into the painting for that illustration, client will love it. And it was all about teaching you not to spin your wheels, chasing unnecessary details. And we want some of that going on here as well. We don't want to be, you know, chasing unnecessary details in this drawing. We want to just put in just enough information so that it gives it a feeling of depth and gives us a feeling of, you know, presence and location, because this, you know, this does exist. This was a little place that I like, that I've visited several times. You know, with someone that means, you know, the world to me, and so it has a significance. It has a memory that I cherish. In fact, several that I cherish from this area, and so we want to bring some of that into the drawing. We want to have some of that where people can kind of feel it, and it's going to be the way that I treat the drawing. It's going to be the way I treat the values. It's going to be, you know, all these different things that are going to culminate. Isn't that a fun word? Culminate, come together, bring, you know, and the best stuff supports the, you know. So if you did make good decisions, all the good decisions come together and support one another. There was a big term in the 90s that people just loved called synergy. They just loved throwing that stuff out. It's all about synergy, folks. Synergy. You heard about this synergy all day long. And they'd bring in people to talk about creating a better group dynamic. And people made, you know, lots of money off that term, synergy. And maybe they're still using it, but they're probably using a different word these days. I haven't been in that sort of environment since I was, you know, in college, working my way through college. And then when I got out, I got into the arts, so I didn't have. It's a little bit different, sort of a dynamic and energy. But the whole idea is that you know, the energies, you know, that you're putting out there and bring to a group then is amplified, and the whole group benefits from the cumulative positive energy. They didn't want, you know, negative energy. They wanted positive energy coming into this stuff. And that was the whole point of that term synergy, the little buzzword. And they put it in, you know, in with all kinds of other things. Oh, we're going to multitask and synergy, and we're going to take over the world, and yay, and whatever. And that's kind of, we're doing a little bit of that here, where all these decisions are now culminating and coming together to make, you know, a hopefully a cohesive idea, and to create a hopefully a cohesive illusion of these rocks sitting on the side of most likely a river, and that these rocks have something in common. So just as these rocks have something in common, perhaps we have something in common, and, you know, that we're trying to say stuff. We're trying to be visual philosophers, if you will. We're trying to say stuff. We're trying to tell a story. This is a story of a weathered rock and the experience that he's had with these friends of his and neighbors that have borne the brunt of the, weathered the storms and weathered the elements and done it together. And, there's certainly a story to be told by these rocks. And that's a story that's, to me, is fascinating. It's a story to me that I think would be interesting. I would hope, just like maybe one day my stories will fascinate, children and grandchildren and all that good stuff, that maybe the drawings will have some of that same, and maybe even more. Because maybe they don't have, maybe they just, that sometimes, like I'd said before, drawings and paintings have a power that just are hard to capture any other way. They whisper, they talk to us, they tell us things. They reach into our souls if they're done right, and they a lot of times will reveal and drudge up memories of the past, good and perhaps of a warm sunny day that we spent, with our father as a child, climbing over the rocks and doing a little fishing, or maybe it was you climbed a mountain with this, again, with a parent, and then climbed back down again, taking a whole day to hike down some large mountain, climbing over boulders and rocks, and picking wild strawberries or something like that. Memories are very powerful things, and that's what these drawings are doing, is they're trying to capture and remind us of these places and these moments in time that are hopefully precious, that we have, that everyone that we have memories that do just kind of, of a time when life was simpler and perhaps, less whatever, stressed or worried or pressed for time, and we could just enjoy it and take it all in. Everyone needs a little bit of that, and it's important no matter what age you're at. And so hopefully we can all go, yeah, I remember that. That was a good time that day. And this is certainly what this was. It was a good time that day. And it was a time where I'd driven up out of the city of where I live, and I'd driven up this wonderful country road, and to this junction where you have this large river climbs up into the mountains and winds its way back as you go up and up and up into elevation, up into the pine trees, and then further up into the aspen trees, until you get towards the tops of the mountains and cascading mountain lakes and running water, and just, it's as beautiful as it sounds, with wildflowers and all of the wonderful stuff that creation has to offer. It was just there for us to enjoy. It was there for us to see. It was there for us to remind ourselves that there's more than just the day-to-day grind. There's more than just, those types of things that are, of course, important, but still, that you got to be careful that you don't get caught up so much that you forget about it and the other stuff, even for a moment, even taking a moment, to feel that's important. That can really help to keep a little less stress. I think we all take you could probably have had days where we needed to take a breath and and maybe refocus and recenter on, just to keep it together, so to speak. One of those days like, I'm losing it, and that's probably where you need the most, where you need to go, okay, I need a moment here. I'm gonna have my brain is gonna break, and it's not gonna be good. So, you know, that's what we want. So again, we've put some of this into here, into our rock. I think that we've got enough where the rock is still starting to look like it, you know, it has form. I think we've got to where it's starting to still feel like it has shadow and light, even though we've darkened some of the lights. We've also darkened some of the shadows, so that we have the fact that this again has light. And now I'm making it darker here so that I have a gradation as it comes over. It's going to have a slight gradation getting lighter, more reflected light, less reflected light back here. And I want that so that I can have a little bit of, just a little bit more depth to that illusion of light and what's happening to the light and all this good stuff. Trying to find a couple places where we can bring out these middle values really quickly, because the middle values are going to help this then bleed into the light. So it's those middle values become very important in this light to dark relationship that we've got with this rock. If we don't have those, it won't quite work. It won't quite look like we've got light and shadow. And so again, I'm strengthening this just a little bit more as we come in here. And I think we're just about to where we can kind of stop. Because I think we've got just enough where we're getting some of these details happening that I want, without having, you know, where we're going nuts. But I think that right there was just a little bit too harsh. So we're going to take that down. Okay, just a little bit. There we go. I also think it's too much. It looks too much like a stripe. So we're going to come over here, and yeah, we're just going to go ahead and soften that. Make it. I was going to try to bring a ridge in there. It just wasn't working. So I'm going to drop it. So I just went ahead and blew it out. That's not a big deal. You know, if it's not working, don't sit there and force it. Now sometimes you can go, oh, I can make it work, and you can't. There's other times where you're like, oh, I'm going to make it work, and you don't. Some of this is just you're going to learn just by drawing stuff. But if you can go, hey, maybe I'll come back and I'll simplify it. And many times that'll help. Again, it's going from darker to lighter this way, darker to lighter this way. We're starting to, you know, it starts to read like we've got, again, just a lot of depth. We could come in here again in a couple places, and again bring in some of these, bring in just some little details here of this rock as we are. You know, so just little stuff. And I'm not doing it everywhere, but I could just, again, bring in just a little bit here and there to give a little more information, a little more detail, as people like to call it, and so forth and so on. And again, we pinch out a little tiny little bit of this eraser, just real tiny. And again, we come in here and we start to, you know, create textures as well. So there's just really fun stuff that we can do with this to, again, give it just a little bit more information. Give it a little bit of feeling of detail, as people like to say. Love that detail, right? So again, we can put just a little bit. If we put it everywhere, though, it's going to go a little flat. So some of this right here was probably a little bit much. Just a bit. So I'm going to pull some of it back out in sort of a patchwork quilt. And then I'll come back in. I'm going to try to bring some of the patchwork back in there. I'm going to use my HB too, because my 2H, because I was using an HB which was too dark. Okay. So again, we got just a little bit more detail here. Again, I could even, you know, if I wanted some random stuff, we could tap the pencil, put some detail in that way. You know, we can do all kinds of stuff to actually start to create. You can, kind of close your eyes and do some random marks. I mean, truly random. I don't think that's a great idea. But again, if you're having problems with random, you might, keep making marks while you're looking over and checking things, so that again it does become a little bit more random, a little bit less, because we like things to be the same. We like sameness. In our life, as many things are not good when they're random. If we got a random heartbeat, we're in trouble. We like it steady, because if it's not steady, we're having all kinds of issues. So again, we could come back in here. Again, just give ourselves a little bit of information that would read, as people would say, detail, because we want more detail in the lights than we have in the darks. So that was part of the problem, is there's almost like there was more information getting put into the shadows than there was getting put into the light. So again, you could come up here and check this ridge line, check the little, some of the little bits of detail that are happening on this. And we don't want to do it everywhere. We just want a smattering of it. If you go too dark, it's going to look like someone, attacked this with a Sharpie marker. We don't want that. We want just enough where we can start to see just a hint of detail. We can always go and put more detail in if we want to. And, we'll do some of those later on, where we will start pushing things into sort of a photorealism sort of thing. But again, if I was doing photorealism, this is the starting point, and I would have another 10 hours almost of going in here and just playing little games, lightening, darkening, putting information in, pulling information out, putting information back in, pulling it back out, making little tiny little snippets here and snippets there, and that's, again, you could play that game for just hours very easily. It's amazing. You'll turn around and go, wow, that's another hour down, or another 2 hours down, or what have you. So I want you guys to go ahead and give this drawing a shot. Now, I think there's probably just a couple more things, because again, this is our detailed rock. This is the one that we really want to have out there. I'm going to get my little eraser. I'm going to see if I can pull out of just a couple places just a little more lights to start, and I'm following some of the patterns that I've already got in here, but it's just to give it a little more information, or in other words, to look like detail. And you can actually start to use this as light lines. So now I'm carving with light lines to actually create, again, the idea of textures and things. And you can certainly do that. And again, by doing that, you're going to have something that's going to look, again, more detailed. If I wanted to, if I was like, well, I wanted to, sort of play this down, again, I could brush this very, very gently. Then I'd come back in here with like a 2H pencil. So again, playing down the information over here, so that this becomes the area of focus. Play down the information over here. We could even go ahead and say, well, maybe this is looking too light, so we could brush this ever so gently and push that back just a bit. Now I'd go back in there with a little H pencil, but I could also come back in here with a little eraser, and again, play with this edge, try to pop this forward. If I wanted this edge to pop a little bit more, as people would say, I could come in here. Now, I'd probably reestablish the shadows, because whenever you brush something, you blow out some of the shadows. So I'd probably come in here and try to reestablish some of those shadows. What do I have here, 2H? Oh, that's good, because that means I can very gently put a value over this. Now, this has to look like light. Right now, by doing that, it no longer looks like it's light. So what we would do is we'd leave the lights where they are and we'd darken the shadows. So we'd come back in here and we go, okay, well, that's just not going to work. So let's go ahead and deepen these shadows so this starts to look like it's in light once again. And so by darkening the shadows dark enough back there, And if that's not doing it enough, again, I can come over here with my eraser a little bit. But if that's still, so let's say I don't want to go any darker, because I don't want, again, we don't want it to be a black nebula back there either. We can pull this back out just a scotch. This is going to be a little softer edge because I'm pouncing with my eraser. But I can start to make it go, oh yeah, okay, that's looking like that's back in the light again. Now again, too many of these have probably 2 minutes looking like the teeth thing. So I lightened that shadow between those two, and I'll leave this alone, but so that merges. And I think I might even change, well, there's this triangular rock, again, that looks kind of weird. Because again, I told you, if things start to look too natural, they look weird. So I'd have to kind of change this rock up a bit to make it look a little less weird. I think the last thing I'll do is we're going to come back in here and we can just darken just a little bit. With this pencil. I think that helps that punch it back. And I think we can get away with maybe using our 2H and pushing it back just a little bit more, because if it's the same light as that edge, we won't have a ridge here. We won't have that edge coming forward. And I think that, again, I think that's looking pretty good. So again, try to do this. You know, you're going to have the reference. You're going to start very simply, as we talked about. Start with our main angles. So we had this one that was the basic angles. So very, very basic. It almost looks abstract. And then we showed this one that was a little bit more detailed and clean, but then I went in, so we made these a little bit more clean, and then we put in the shadow shapes. Now remember that this would not be where I would start this simple and start the shadows. I'd actually go ahead and go, well, this isn't a straight edge. This comes down, over, up, over. It's still that basic angle, but you go down, up, down, over, you know, give a little more information. But then we took this where we'd done that and we filled in all the different shadow shapes, and we immediately had sort of a feeling of depth. And there's a couple places where I think I'd still come back in, see if we get a little bit more dark in there. Sometimes with graphite, getting really, really rich darks can be very, very hard. So if I have a 4B and it's not working, well, then I would grab a 6B, and I'd put this 6B to work. I'd really see if I could get in there and start to, now you got to be careful. You press too hard and graphite starts to become shinier, and so it will actually start to look lighter. So you have to be careful with some of your 6Bs and 8Bs and stuff like that. But I think I could darken this whole thing by maybe another 10%, drop in one more step of value. Then I think would give it a little bit more punch. So anyways, but give this a shot. Sit down, try to, you know, do this little collection of rocks. Think about the angles. Think about this is, you know, in fact, where's my, you know, again, where we had, this was supposed to be our little edge. This was the front, this is the top, but I think that's, this is maybe still a little too dark. So we're going to blow out some of the value on this front side, because we said, well, the light's still coming from this way, so I think it's breaking the form shadows. So all we're going to do is we're going to lighten it. We're going to try to keep what's there, but we're going to just try to lighten it just a bit. And it almost looks like he's got eyes here, so we're going to have to, it's got like eyes and a nose. Probably not what I want. So I would probably go in there and rework that area a little bit. But I think this is looking a little better, where at least it doesn't have where it's looking like there's, you know, there's some half tones or middle values, but it's not so dark where we're like going, hey, wait a minute, that can't be right. And for a moment it was kind of, I was looking, I was like, no, that looks like it's too dark. So again, we brightened that up, and now this almost has more contrast than this. So that would be where you go, oh, hold on a minute, you know, what's going on over here? So we might have to, you know, do a little more tapping to bring in just some very soft light on this, as far as that goes. So, you know, again, we could just lighten some of this up, and that way that we'd have, this is still more contrast. If that still doesn't have, still feels like it's too bright, well, then I could come here with my 2H and just put a very light tone over this light value right here, and just knock it back or darken it slightly, just a little tiny bit. Not by much. That's like half a step of value. And that actually looks better, because before it was kind of upstaging this one. We could still come in here and go, well, wait a minute. We said we lightened that one because of form shadows. Again, we could do the same thing to this. So what I would do if I was going to lighten the whole thing is I'd go ahead and roll this out like a piece of Play-Doh or something. And then you could just come over here and roll it over the top here, and it will lighten everything just very gently in case, just a little bit. And again, just that little bit can be like, oh, the lights came on. Because all we did was we rolled this over there and it lightened everything across the entire board just a little bit. And I think that looks a lot better. So again, that's the whole idea of pushing and pulling this stuff. So go ahead and sit down, give this a shot. I wish you the best. Go ahead, get out there, be more creative. Bye-bye now.